So we have some young, not yet married people, and we have some of us that have been married for going on close to 28 years now for my husband and I don't know.
Soon to be.
Yeah. But it's not only choose the right woman, but once you're married, keep loving only that woman and not somebody else, right? So let's look at some counsel in Proverbs chapter 5, verses 3 to 14. Do you want to read it?
For the 5,
3 through 14. Uh-huh.
For the lips of the adulterous woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end she is bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps lead straight to the grave. She gives no thought to the way of life, her paths wander aimlessly, but she does not know it. Now then, my sons, listen to me, do not turn aside from what I say. Keep to a path far from her, do not go near the door of her house, lest you lose your honor to others, and your dignity to one who is cruel. Lest strangers feast on your wealth, and your toil enrich the house of another. At the end of your life you will groan, when your flesh and body are spent. You will say, how I hated discipline, how my heart spurned correction. I would not obey my teachers, or turn my ear to my instructors, that I was soon in serious trouble in the assembly of God's people.
Okay. So several places in chapter after chapter throughout, you keep hearing Solomon say, my son, my son, my son. So this counsel is phrased in terms of a man to an adulterous woman. But could that same counsel be reversed to maybe a mother telling her daughter or whatever, don't go into those womanizer men that do this, are going to use you and leave you and whatever, right? So I mean, it's in that time period, in that counsel, he's writing to his son, but the counsel goes both ways. It's not only women that are the perverted, wicked ones, and the men need to stay away from them. It goes both ways, right? So, in today's day and age, it's so prevalent to live together before you're married, test drive, so to speak, whatever, just like see if you're compatible, see if it all works out, and then maybe there'll be a wedding at some point. And that's so normalized in society now, especially here in the Northwest. It's just kind of the norm. I have so many coworkers that are doing that, and it's not like they're embarrassed to say that they're living with their boyfriend or their girlfriend or whatever. And what are the pitfalls? Even if this is not, now this what we just read is about adultery and being unfaithful to your spouse or whatever. But what would be the reasons to avoid that kind of a relationship before?
Well, Ellen White says that when people do stuff like that, material and resources are wasted.
Material and resources are wasted.
Yeah, spiritual resources,
Mm-hmm.
emotional resources.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh. And it's interesting. There's one of my coworkers that I'm coming to my mind right now, sweet girl in her 20s, really good medical assistant there at work, and she's been in a long-term relationship now for a couple years with a young man, and they have their own apartment. They now have a little dog that they have together, and I mean, this appears to be a stable long-term relationship, right? All of us at work are sort of like waiting because different ones have like gotten engaged and married, and we're like, when's Gabby's turn? When's she going to get engaged and married, When's this guy going to pop the question on her? He's just living with her for all these years. And I haven't heard anything to indicate that there's problems in the relationship. However, we were talking about pets the other day, and she said, yeah, I told my boyfriend that if anything ever happens between us, then I get the dog. I get to keep the dog, And there's that, not that divorce can't happen to married couples, but when you're living together without being married, there's always that sort of escape hatch, exit plan in the background, right? Because, well, if this doesn't work out, We just move out. There's no legal documents, no commitments to anything, right? And does that build trust? Does that build a healthy, long-term relationship? Not really, does it? Because there's always that, like, if I'm really upset with you, if I don't find you to be fulfilling me in some way or another, I can always leave. And it's easy. I just pack my bag. There's no, like, going to the lawyer. There's nothing complicated about it. I'll just leave. And so God knows what he's talking about, right? When he says, this is why you don't do these things. Not only an affair within a marriage, which, as we just read, brings ruin to the people, and those of us that have lived long enough have multiple examples we can think of people that have gone down that path and seen the ruin and the heartache and the whatever that it has created in their families. But even just bringing it into today's context and the temptations that happen to young people or to, there's a lot of reasons why God says, keep that as a precious thing within marriage, keep it safe, guard it, don't share it with anybody else, because all of God's laws and rules, what are they for? What is their purpose? Our benefit. They protect us. God says, I don't want you to be heartbroken. I don't want you to, be devastated and messed up in your life. This is why you keep it as something sacred. And continuing on, verses 15 to 20. Somebody want to read that?
Drink water out of thine own.
Yeah, speak louder. 15 to 20.
Drink waters out of thine own cisterns, and running waters out of thine own wells. Let thy fountains be dispersed abroad, and rivers of waters. Let them be only thine own. Strangers with thee. Let thy fountain be blessed, and rejoice with thee. Let her be as the loving kind. Let her breast satisfy thee at all times, and be thou lavish always with her love.
And verse 20.
And why wilt thou, my son, be ravished with a strange woman, and embrace the bosom of a stranger?
Do you think that Solomon had just a little bit of experience from which he was writing from? I don't know exactly at what stage of his life he's writing this, but we know the Bible records he had 700 wives, 300 concubines. He had just a little bit of experience with which to write counsel from, don't you think? And he's saying, verse 18 says, and rejoice with the wife of your youth. That means that first one that you got married to a long time ago, don't keep looking for another one. Don't be content to be with that same person and be happy and be faithful all your life. He knows that, and he says in verse 19, be satisfied with her in an intimate way. Don't think that you need somebody else to satisfy those desires. And okay, so how have modern means of communication added an extra layer of temptation, of access, of seduction, whatever? Is this a little different times even than 20 years ago, 30 years ago?
There's
Lots of porn, okay? What about social media? What about just texting? What about websites that you can meet people on? So if somebody was a little bit unhappy in their marriage, they're really just looking for somebody to talk to because I'm just really fed up with this woman or this man, I can't handle it. The temptation to secretly communicate with somebody online that you go through, and they're willing to hear all of your woes, and and it might just seem like this innocent friend that you're communicating with to start with, right? And and before long, that's the person you're obsessed with, and that's the person that you have to go meet, and you can, doesn't the Bible say that to even lust in your heart is committing adultery, right? So you don't have to be physically in the same bed with that person to have committed adultery, right? So the internet, definitely, so many different ways, whether it's porn, whether it's just a fantasy relationship with somebody else that you're lusting after, whatever the picture and form it takes, the devil has come up with a lot of, and it's so much easier to do that secretly now, right? In the past, if a man, would have to meet up physically with somebody, and now he can, in the privacy of his own room, his own house, on his own computer, have all these inappropriate relationships or viewing inappropriate material. What would you tell a friend if there was somebody who was struggling with temptations like that? How would you counsel somebody? Yes?
I would be tempted to pray with them right off the bat and say, you're not going to be able to conquer this by yourself.
Exactly.
But I have a God that's more powerful than your problems.
Yep.
Maybe we should pray about it right now, and then we can go from there.
Right. That's a very good place to start, and a good place to be every time the temptation comes up, to just teach your friend to go to God, and then take steps of deleting some of that stuff off of your, putting web blockers and different things that help to screen and filter some of that could also be.
Well, when you go to God in prayer, the Holy Spirit is right there to reinforce whatever you're trying to reconcile, and it convicts the person's heart. If you don't go to prayer, you're on your own.
Yeah.
You're just out in the world there with you,
Yeah.
floating along without a path.
Yes.
And yes, that's the most important step. But there's also another is try to replace that bad habit with a good one. It's like when you stop smoking. You try to replace the habit of reaching for something in your pocket with something else, something good that can come to your mind instantly instead of
Right.
other wrong habits.
And I'm thinking, after what you're saying also, wouldn't, if you had a close friend who was aware and who had prayed with you, to have an accountability partner, to just check in with that person from time to time and say, how's it going, how's the battle? Just a quiet, confidential, partner that helps you stay on track. And just like, we can say, yes, the Lord gives us victory, but does the devil stop tempting? The Lord gives us victory, but tomorrow we might need another victory, and the next day we might need another victory, right? And so every time we have to give that to the Lord. And I think that just like the alcoholic is probably wise to just avoid walking into a bar, even though he may have given it up and he's done with it. It's probably wise to just stay away from those kind of scenarios where you're going to be potentially tempted. And likewise, maybe taking a fast from the internet for a while if you had a problem with that, or I know someone who, when they gave their heart to the Lord, who had struggled with that, asked a family member to set up a restricted code, whatever, like some way, thing on the computer, and it's beyond my capabilities or understanding, but put safeguards on his laptop so that he didn't know the code, he didn't know how to get in and change that, and it was to help protect him from those temptations, because he didn't want that anymore. He was, giving his heart to the Lord, but he also knew that the devil was a roaring lion, and he didn't want to set up those temptations for him. So doing all those different steps, but bottom line, every time a temptation comes, going to the Lord with it, right? Okay, let's move on. So Monday is a call to fathers. So we have Proverbs 13 and Proverbs 15 we're going to look at. Proverbs 13:22. Look at what are some of the characteristics of a good father. So we're going to read through some different verses, like what what are the things that are maybe the responsibilities of a father, a role of a father. So let's look at 13:22. Does somebody have that? Don't be shy. All right, nobody's willing to read it. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous. So, what I read in that is like some financial responsibility, right? He's thinking forward, trying to build a legacy for his family, maybe paying off his house so that he's able to pass that on to his children, so that they have a place to live, or whatever the case might be. But being financially responsible to care for his family, right? Let's look at Proverbs 15, verses 1 and 2. Somebody will read that out loud for me. Proverbs 15, 1 and 2.
A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise adorns knowledge, but the mouth of the fool gushes folly.
Okay. So, in the context of a father, what is this saying the father should be in terms of the way he speaks to people and to his family? Gently, not harshly, not stirring up anger. Thoughtfully, thinking through maybe his words before he speaks them, right? Because it says the tongue of the wise, so a wise person's going to kind of filter what comes out of their mouth, right? They're going to think through and be use discernment, right? Let's, in the same chapter, look down to verse 27. Somebody want to read that?
He that is greedy
Okay. So this is once more in terms of financial accountability and whatnot. How might being greedy for gain look like in today's context? In the role of a dad, let's say, think of that. How would that be? Gambling, okay, that was one I hadn't thought of, but yeah, Randy? Workaholic, that's what I was thinking, okay? Now, there are men who have to take two jobs simply because maybe the jobs that they have pay so little that they can barely, they're simply to keep a roof over their family's house, so we can't pass judgment on them. But are there men who, as Randy said, are maybe greedy for a promotion at work, greedy for some other greater financial gain, this next promotion, maybe they've got a job that's adequate, that leaves them time for their families, but maybe there's an offer of a job that's going to be a lot more money, but it's going to take them away from home, and they won't see their children as much, and they'll be, so could those be some of the ways that maybe a man needs to say, what does God want me to do for my family? Not just what's financial gain, but what is, yes, Henry?
No man has to work two jobs. That's a misnomer. A guy asked me one time at church, we need $58,000 running behind. I said, okay, let's just ask him to root for $58,000. For what? You teach people that we're supposed to believe in God. So now it's your time to show people that you truly believe in God. That's why I say a man don't need two jobs, because God is the one that takes care of us. You don't take care of yourself, it's God.
Yeah. Well, we have to let each person be in their own shoes and in their own situation with the Lord and know what is necessary. I know that there's plenty of single moms who don't get paid as much that end up scraping the barrel with two jobs. But
I guess it all falls down to where's his focus.
Right, I think that's really what it is. So if you're greedy for gain, you're not just looking to support your family, you're looking to, for other things and maybe neglecting what you should be doing at home. On Monday's lesson, there's the paragraph in the middle is really good. It says, the character of fathers have a direct impact on their children and the legacy they pass on to them. Children look to their fathers for support, devoted affection, guidance, and modeling. Proverbs lauds those fathers who are reliable providers and wise managers of family resources. Many are the ways in which the greedy bring ruin to their household. Fathers must be mindful to give priority to family over work. Godly fathers seek to be patient and in command of their emotions. They respect their children's dependence upon them. They discipline their children, but are careful not to abuse their position of authority. Most important, dedicated fathers want to follow God, to be controlled by His love and by the teaching of His word, that they might guide the feet of their children in the right way. In the end, the most important thing a father can do for his children is to love their mother. And that is really powerful and very, very true. His faithfulness and continuing affection for her, or lack of these, have a telling effect upon children's well-being even into adulthood. So modeling as parents the kind of relationship that you want them to have in terms of their future spouse, in terms of just so many things, that relationship between mom and dad can have such an influence, right? Randy, you look like you're ready to say something.
Yeah, you know, 1 Timothy 5:8, you know, that verse there has really barked me a lot of times. I'll read it because probably, you know, it's not in the lesson, but it says, but if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. You know, I think that, you know, it's easy to think in the monetary sense, but in the spiritual sense, it's way huger too. Because
Yes.
so many times we as guys, you know, we're priests of the house.
Mm-hmm.
And when we don't do our job as priests of the house and teach, you know, and just pray to God that we have a godly wife, but you know, mercy on all of us, because we failed in those areas so much. You know, it's so easy to fail in those areas.
Right.
You know, it's something to really guard and take seriously.
Right, and I think there's another element to that priest of the household, is not just being, you know, you could be strict about saying, we're going to have family worship every night, and we're going to sit down, and we're going to do this, and I'm going to be the priest of the household, but if dad is outside of that family worship time barking and mean and cruel and unkind and mean to mom, it's not going to, you know, so dad himself needs to have that relationship with the Lord as well, right? To have spent his own time with the Lord, and then he can be the kind of priest of the household that's not just in word and not just saying we're going to read our scriptures or we're going to pound this into your head, but I'm going to model this for you, right? Okay, so let's look at kind of skipping over to, we'll come back to the children's stuff, to Wednesday and Thursday, which is the relationship with women. We talked about the fathers. Now let's look at Proverbs 21. So flip over verses 9 and verses 19. So somebody want to read verse 9 and 19?
Better to live on a corner of the roof than to share a house with a quarrelsome wife.
Okay. Verse 19.
Better to live in a desert than with a quarrelsome and nagging wife.
Okay. So like the lesson points out, Solomon throws a little humor in here, right? There might have been times with the numbers of women that he had around him that he just really wanted to be in the wilderness, to just like, you know, can I just escape? There's just a little too much estrogen in this household. There's too many women. There's too much whatever, right? So we laugh at the humor of it, but there's a lot of truth behind it, right? So, you know, I mean, today's day and age, most of us women are also going out of the house and working, but And there was a day when the wife was mostly at home and the husband would come home. Well, if he met her, she met him at the door and she was just, he's gonna want to turn around and go back out again, and stay longer at work and do all these other things, right? But also in whatever the case may be, and I think this is once again, can flip to either spouse. Like, it would be hard as a wife to be with a husband who's any of those kind of characteristics, but women have kind of the reputation sometimes of being the nagger or the cranky one, right? And so there's some wisdom here. How would you apply this to before marriage? If a young man is looking for a spouse, how's he going to know if she's going to be a contentious woman or if she's going to be a nagging woman? How could he maybe recognize red flags ahead of time?
Look at how they interact with other people.
Look at how they interact with other people.
Watch how they treat the parent of the opposite gender.
Okay, so how do they talk to their dads, or yeah? And not every child is going to be exactly like their parent, but we as we've grown older, especially as I began parenting, I began seeing my mother in me over and over and over, and hearing my mother's words come out of my mouth. So I don't know if any of you have been in that same shoe. So maybe looking also at her mom, right? How does her mom interact with her dad? Because that's the modeling that she was shown, right? So it's possible to be different, but we oftentimes kind of imitate what we were raised with, right? So let's look at Proverbs 27, verse 15. There's another one, I think.
A quarrelsome wife is like the dripping of a leaky roof in a rain.
Okay. My version says a continual dripping on a very rainy day. So this is counsel, for men looking at a woman, but we as women need to also examine ourselves and say, make sure I'm not that person, right? That I'm not doing that continual dripping. Kind of check ourselves when the words are coming out of our mouths and say, is this really how I should be speaking to my husband, and to making the home be a safe place that he wants to be and not where he wants to escape from, right? In fairness to Solomon, there is included in chapter 31 the example of a virtuous woman, right? And it's I'm going to read it because of its length. It says, "Who can find a virtuous wife? For her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and willingly works with her hands." As we read this, think about, we live in a different era. Women are not having to weave their own clothes and do all these kind of things. But try to think of how applications to today's. She is like the merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. She also rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and a portion for her maidservants. She considers a field and buys it. From her profits she plants a vineyard. She girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms. She perceives that her merchandise is good, and her lamp does not go out by night. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She extends her hand to the poor. Yes, she reaches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household is clothed with scarlet. She makes tapestry for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies sashes for the merchants. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. She watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. So if we, as women, take, or even as men, if you judge your spouse by this, it's a pretty tough standard to live up to, isn't it? However, I've read myself in there many different times. I'm like, see, I'm up before everybody else in the morning. I'm the last one to go to bed. I'm like, I think I'm doing pretty well. But, you know, as the lesson pointed out, not necessarily everybody is going to have every single one of those characteristics. But a virtuous woman is going to have these types of characteristics, right? She's going to, when we can look at principles. I asked you to look for like principles for today. Did anybody think of anything that is applicable to today's day and age?
I think virtue should be one of the foremost things people, because if you're not virtuous, you don't have any integrity, you're not trustworthy.
Mm-hmm. So trust is mentioned in here, isn't it? And also that her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. She opens her mouth with wisdom. There's no gossip in here, right? She's not the neighbor woman that's chatting about everybody else in the neighborhood and what they're doing, or at work gossiping about. She's virtuous, like you said. She's honest. She's generous. She helps the needy. She takes care of her family, basically, right? And is forward thinking, really, through all of this. She's not just for today. She's planned ahead. Her pantry is full. Her, family is clothed for the winter. Things like that. She's a woman who's caring for her household, who's thinking ahead, who's planning ahead, who's doing those things, right? But like he said, virtue, trust, those are really the root of this. Let's look at children and discipline and all of those interesting things. Proverbs 29:17. So flip back to that. And we'll talk a little bit about, there's some interesting words that we can kind of wonder about, but I think that I learned something interesting in this lesson this week about this. So let's look at 29:17. Someone want to read?
Discipline your son, and he will give you rest. He will give delight to your heart.
Okay. I read that quickly before, and now I'm just seeing something that I kind of skimmed over before. How is it that if you discipline your child that they will give you rest? Yes?
Because they'll be respectful and obedient, and away they go and they follow the Lord.
So, I'm thinking even of just small children. If they're obedient and disciplined, you have a lot more peace in the household, won't you? You're not having temper tantrums all the time, and you're not having, so that he'll give you rest in that they're not making you pull your hair out all the time, right?
Well, when you correct them, if they actually take it to heart, then they see that this is not acceptable. Mm-hmm. This activity is not acceptable. Mm-hmm. So mom says, I got to stop doing this. Mm-hmm. And she loves me. Maybe she's right. So I'll stop. Mm-hmm. And then you don't have to deal with that. There may be 4 other things that still have to be dealt with, but at least that one's solved for now.
Yeah. All right, let's look at Proverbs 6, verses 20 to 23. Somebody want to read that?
My son, keep your father's command. Do not forsake the law of your mother. Bind them continually upon your heart. Tie them around your neck. When you roam, they will lead you. When you sleep, they will keep you. Wake, they will speak with you. For the commandment is a lamp, instruction are the way of life.
Okay. Yeah, we have a scripture song that we know. The tune runs through my head as we're reading that. So, so as parents, what is our responsibility? I think Randy already touched on that. What does it say we're supposed to do? But also, yeah, keep your father's commands, and don't forsake the law of your mother. But I think if your father is a godly father and your mother is a godly mother, then those laws and those commands and those instructions of your parents are going to be laced with God's law, right? And God's principles. And so when you're binding them on your heart, you're implanting them in your mind, you're learning, as you said, to when you take that correction, now, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore, that wasn't right, mom didn't like that, or dad didn't, and you're learning and growing from that, and you're binding them on your heart. They're becoming part of you. They're ingrained in you, right? God says He writes His law in our hearts. What does that mean? It means that just the very thoughts we do, the choices we make are guided and directed by His law in our heart, right? That's where it's not just a library that you open up and read sometimes and it's tucked away in there. It's part of your core, right? And so as parents, we have a responsibility to train our children in that way. And then this counsel is saying to the children, accept your parents' counsel. Let it become part of you, because it's going to guide you and lead you, right? Now I want to have a few minutes to talk about something important here. Let's 29 same. Let's see. Go back to Proverbs 29, 15. The rod and rebuke give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. So I'm going to read a couple here. We're going to talk about what it means by the rod. And then Proverbs 13, 24. He who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly. And Proverbs 23, 13 and 14. Do not withhold correction from a child, for if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from hell. Now, how many children have been abusively corrected in their lives with parents who quoted that verse over them, right? What exactly is Proverbs talking about here? What is Solomon saying? Randy?
Well, thanks for bringing that up. I had never thought of it that way, but the rod it's talking about here is the cross. A lot of it, you can talk about giving a kid a spanking or a beating. Remember Moses brought out with the rod and the outstretched arm? That's talking about the cross. You're training up a child in the way he should go. And Jesus used terms of endearment when he was talking to the disciples, my little children. Training them to go to Jesus, to go to the cross. I think it's so important. I just never thought of it. The rod there is, specifically you can say there's a double application. But the rod, when it talks about rod and the wood and saving their souls, saving them from hell, it's talking about a big meaning there.
Mm-hmm. Another meaning that I got from the lesson, yes, Floyd, go ahead.
Here, the rod is a symbol of disciplinary action, not necessarily beating. Look at the rod the shepherd uses as a matter of guidance.
Right.
It is a fact that sometimes a child may need a spanking. But we know that what has happened is that a lot of parents have actually abused children.
Right.
And Proverbs is not talking about abusing of children.
Right. I like...
The thing is that discipline is something which is to be done in love.
Right. And as the lesson drew my attention to that shepherd's rod thing, how many times we've quoted the 23rd Psalm, right? Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So, as parents, we are to guide our children, right? We want to keep them from evil. We want to keep them from doing the wrong things that are going to hurt them. And that rod, the shepherd had a hook on the end of it, so he could hook it around the neck of the lamb and say, no, that's not safe. Don't go down that path. You need to go this way. You need to go that way. And so it's a form of correction. It's a form of guidance, right? And as it was pointed out, it should be done in love. Yes, Henry?
You have to understand, a rod is everything in the discipline that everything. It's not just beating or whooping a child. It's just directing, it's loving it, it's doing it's all it.
It's symbolic for the whole thing.
But it is talking about spanking.
Mm-hmm.
It's talking about spanking. There's a difference between spanking and beating.
Yes. So, certainly abuse has no place in any Christian home, in anybody's home, right? We need to whatever we do in love. We explain to the child that why it's harmful for them and why they need to, and reason with them and give them examples and be loving about it. Yes, Floyd?
So, Wayne 1 translation puts it, 29:15, that to discipline a child produces wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at that, discipline a child is something the child is going to be learning.
Mm-hmm.
The child is something the child is going to be learning as a result of that discipline. Trying to train that child to go in the right direction.
And I'm sure all of you have seen this over and over, but in my work, I am often having women come in with small children. I'm a nurse, and I'll be sitting down and I'll be talking to the mom about maybe she's pregnant again or whatever, and we're going through our stuff that we have to do in the clinic. And, there's probably at least 75% of those kids that are not well disciplined, that they're making all kinds of noise, they're bouncing off the walls, they're doing stuff that's not appropriate. And then when I have one whose child is so well ordered and so quiet and respectful and whatever during the visit, it's just stands out in contrast, and that verse we read earlier about when your child is disciplined, that you're at rest. When they're not disciplined, there's no rest for anybody. There's no rest for the people that are in the shopping in the grocery store with you. There's no rest for anybody else, because that child has never learned self-control.
No rest even for that child.
Right, and they haven't learned self-control. So, last comment, because we're out of time.
It's not a comment, it's a question.
Okay.
The question is, what is training it? Is training the child in the way it should go?
Modeling. Training a child is modeling. As Christian, if we are taking time to spend that time with the Lord each day, we are going to be modeling for them how to live a godly life and shaping and guiding them through all the pitfalls of life that are out there, right?
And seeing their strengths and weaknesses and guiding them in the way they see God wants them to go.
Right. I know this is a subject that we could talk on forever and ever, but we are out of time. So thank you for your comments and your input, and let's close with prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the guidance that you've given us in your word of how to be good spouses, how to be good parents, and most of all, Lord, we need to have that relationship with you, because without that, we cannot have the victory over our own sinful, selfish natures, and that will get in the way of good parenting and good spouse relationships. So we just pray that you will be first in our lives, and that we will follow your counsel, and that will carry over into all of our relationships. And we ask all this in your name. Amen.
Do not
Passenger Lincoln,
Oh, yeah.
come in.
There we go.
You're not Passenger Lincoln,
Oh, yeah.
come in.